It's 10 times the terror.
Hello there. Getting old and senile.
Hi, and welcome to 10 Times the Terror. My name is Ralph.
And I'm Paul.
And today we're going to discuss the new film, Godzilla vs. Kong. Paul, so why don't you fill us in? Tell us what you thought.
Yeah, background, I've spent years watching all these films, and this actually is a remake of a film that was came out back in the 60s, about 1963. And I have to say, everybody wants to think about the special effects and the fighting between the two giant monsters, and that's all there, but not enough else. I have to say, I found the kind of superficial. There's so many characters, it's hard to keep straight what's going on. The film was directed by Adam Wingard, who's done a number of horror films. She Dies Tomorrow, then A Horrible Way to Die, which I think won an award at the Toronto Film Festival, and then a remake of the Blair Witch Project, among other things. And we can maybe look at some of those down the road. But having grown up with Godzilla and Kong both, they were on the old $1 Million Movie show in New York, both of them. My problem was that I felt like the whole film was underdeveloped. I felt we needed to know more about the characters. The whole role of the little girl, Gia, a deaf mute, it comes across as a cliche. That's been in horror movies and monster movies for over 100 years. And this just didn't add anything to a relationship that just sort of is there. And what was also underdeveloped, I felt, was some of the richer possibilities of the narrative, especially the idea of the center of the earth, where you have these monsters and titans and all that. That again is a classic theme, goes back to Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth, and Edgar Rice Burroughs did a whole series on Pellucidar, which was the center of the earth. And of course, then we have the big battle scenes. But I felt like there's not enough to connect with. You can have two-dimensional characters, and that's true in the original King Kong, whether it's Ann Darrow, Fay Ray, or Robert Armstrong, or even Bruce Cabot. But we have to have a reason to connect with them. There has to be some point of reference where some point of entry.
Are the other reviewers that you've looked at, are they saying the same thing you're saying?
Some have, yeah. I mean, I think you come across as if it's a giant video show, with the fighting going on. But you've got kind of the classic, isn't exactly a mad scientist, but the scientist who, again, is trying to, save the world from these titanic beings, but ends up making it worse. And again, there's spoiler alert, there's a third monster here, a Mega Godzilla, who is the real threat in the course of this. And what it ends up being is that Kong and Godzilla have to save humanity, which they have in the last several films, by fighting this new monster, which an enterprising scientist has created, thinking that he's going to eliminate the problem of these titans. So you've got themes in here that could really be developed, but I think the whole thing is underdeveloped. And,
yeah, but hasn't that been the case with all of these? I mean, the only Godzilla movie, maybe I'm too much a purist, but the only Godzilla movie that I ever thought had a really great message was the original 1956. I mean, what Godzilla films did have good character development? Can you think of any?
Yeah. Not really. Well, one of the problems here is there's just so many characters that you kind of get lost in. You almost need some kind of a checklist, to identify with all the people. And so the theme of a created monster that's supposed to solve humanity's problems, but turns on humanity, becomes a rebel. I mean, that's how familiar is that We've been through that lots of times. Talking
Yeah.
about whether it's Frankenstein or whatever else. And the same thing here with with Kong. I mean, Kong is on the side of humanity, and it's hard to know where we fit in with these things. So what we really end up with is we end up with a new monster that's been created. That's a human product, result of human exploration by a misguided scientist. And rather than that taking the threat of these titans or monsters away, it becomes a monster itself. But there's, you have to have, there has to be some humanity to the monster. One of the great themes in horror films, and this is crossover horror sci-fi. One of the great themes in that is the monster weeps, and even in the original King Kong or the original Godzilla, as scary as these monsters are, you have a sense of sympathy for them. And
there's nothing great. There's no better example of that when you come to these Japanese original stories than that of Rodan. I mean, if anybody can remember that scene from Rodan at the end where Rodan's mate has the opportunity to leave and save itself, and it stays hovering over the volcano to just protect its mate, and they both die. And he speaks. You remember that scene, Paul? I mean, it's actually a very moving scene. That these animals have compassion, or like we had talked about Gorgo, where the mother comes to rescue the child.
Yeah, there needs to be a theme. I mean, again, I think what holds together, horror and sci-fi, which come at these things from opposite ends, but the key theme we have to look for is some kind of redemption. And without redemption, everything's just black and cold and disheartening. Evil conquers, evil triumphs, or whatever else. There has to be some level, and I didn't find that here at all. And I feel like the main reason to see the film is special effects. Well, that's not enough. There's got to be more to it than that. And I think they tried for that, especially with the relationship with the little girl, but it just doesn't come off. I mean, it's more like you're simply walking through the paces of the story rather than really getting into it, coming to grips with what the story is supposed to be about. And
this is the genius of Spielberg, that in many of his films, whether it's Jaws or Jurassic Park, he often has many different characters, and every one of them is memorable because they all have an important pivotal part in the film. I mean, think of Jaws. You could think about every character, and every one of them is memorable. Where in these films, I find many times, you really don't care about them because they haven't been developed.
Yeah, and you don't. Again, they don't have to be fully developed, like in classic drama or something. But they need to have a point of reference where we identify with them. For example, mentioning Jaws, the mayor in Jaws is sort of a caricature, but he makes sense in the idea that he wants to support his community. He doesn't want to lose the business of the 4th of July, and so he's totally unaware of what's really going on. But the fact remains that we can identify with a guy who's trying to make things work for his community, as right. Misguided as he may be. But there's a point of reference there, and there are points of reference, throughout the film. And I just, didn't find much of a point of reference in this film at all. And I mean, how many Godzilla and King Kong movies are there going to have to be? And in the previous era, like the earlier King Kong versus Godzilla, you basically, this is long before CGI or anything. You have guys in suits, and then I think in some films, King Kong escapes. Maybe that's in my mind. The monster or Kong, whatever, is a puppet.
Yeah.
and you almost can see the strings, moving them along. I think there's got to be this point of identification, point of entry, if you will, with the characters. And
Well,
there,
you say there's got to be, but maybe not in the eyes of, maybe we're just of a generation that more appreciates that. I wonder if you interviewed most of the younger people, to which I think Hollywood is favoring because they're the ones these films tend to draw. If those kids would say the story was fine, the monsters were cool, there was a lot of action. I mean, I hear a
yeah,
lot of this. The Star Trek movies today are much more action oriented than character oriented. I mean, we used to watch the old shows from the 60s on television. They had very little in the way of special effects, and yet they were marvelously produced and written.
yeah, and so was Twilight Zone, for example, too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you almost had plastic kind of
So scale
special effects.
1 to 10 scale, what do you give it?
Uh, being charitable, maybe a 4.
Yeah, I know. I think on our shows, as we progress with doing our reviews, we ought to give them a rating. That
Yeah,
the people know what we ourselves think. Like, for me, Forbidden Planet would get a 9. I don't know if I'd give anything a 10 because if you give something a 10, then how do you ever go beyond that? But a 4 is a pretty low rating. Wow, that's not very generous, is it?
no, I mean, and that is being generous. It's, we may want to look at some of these other horror films that this director did, just to, in a way of kind of appreciating his some of his other work. But yeah, just with this, I mean, I was excited about it. I remember those films, and again, remember we didn't see the original Godzilla first on TV. We saw the Raymond Burr revamping of it, but then later when we saw the whole thing, you could see that these things symbolize things of value, and in today's world with all the concerns about climate change and the environment, I just felt they could I've done a lot more with that, and I felt that the set piece, the thing that I found most intriguing about the film is the whole idea of the center of the earth, where all kinds of things exist that don't exist on the surface of the earth, and
Yeah.
that goes back to Jules Verne. You need to have some location like the Jurassic Park where dinosaurs still exist, and that's been in film since its beginning. The first version of The Lost World was a silent film. Willis O'Brien did that, years before he did King Kong, and you had dinosaurs fighting and so forth. And the monsters have to be part of an environment, and I didn't feel that was ever the case here either. Um, they just get awakened and kind of get pulled into what's happening, and finally at the climax, they come out once again to save humanity, not to. So maybe that's the redemptive part, but it just comes across as too shallow. I mean, we're not looking for Shakespearean characters or anything, but we need to have something more to this. And I just felt the little girl angle was just, that's been done so many times, and I felt this doesn't really add anything to it.
Okay, well, that's the story then. A 4, okay, and we don't want to dampen anybody's excitement that hasn't seen the film. But then again, we all have our own way of seeing these things, and that's how we see it. We give it a 4. Any closing words, Paul?
No, I think to be fair to the director, we maybe want to see one of his horror films and see what's there. Again, there are a lot of horror films too that can just be special effects and blood and gore and stuff, and not to be dismissive, because apparently this one grisly title, A Horrible Way to Die, but apparently won an award at the Toronto Film Festival. So that's some important recognition. So maybe we should check that out, just to kind of broaden our perspective of who's working today and doing these kind of things. But I just felt that Godzilla vs. Kong was a missed opportunity.
Missed
thought
opportunity.
They could have done more with the whole center of the earth idea. They could have done more with the idea of putting the natural order at risk. With creating a new titan, a new monster. I just didn't feel that you got concerned about. You go back and you mention things like the Spielberg, like Jurassic Park and Jaws. You get caught up in what's happening and what's a very real threat. And I never felt that here. And there's no way that this new monster, this Godzilla, is gonna really threaten the real Godzilla or King Kong.
Well, that's the way it is, folks. And until next time, this is Ralph.
And this is Paul.
And we'll catch you next time on 10 Times the Terror. Take care.
Right. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to
It's 10 Times the Terror,
the podcast.
You are impossible.
Ralph, you're well-intentioned, but totally wrong. Thank you for listening to 10 Times the Terror. This podcast would not be possible without listeners like you. You can find out more about our podcast by visiting our website, 10timestheterror.com. That's 10xtheterror.com.